Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. Ever since I was a child, I had dreamt of embarking on an incredible journey, and when the opportunity finally arose, I seized it without hesitation. Little did I know that my year abroad would turn into a harrowing tale of betrayal and the fight to reclaim what was rightfully mine. My company had selected me for a prestigious work assignment overseas. The thought of spending an entire year exploring a new culture and making lasting memories was exhilarating. Of course, before setting off on my transatlantic journey, I had to ensure that my house would be taken care of in my absence. Selling it was out of the question, considering the company would cover my living expenses while abroad. I thought I had a foolproof plan in place. Unbeknownst to me, a series of events unfolded during my absence that would haunt me for months. Rather than learning about these incidents in a few days upon my return, I'll recount them chronologically, as they occurred over the course of that fateful year. It all began when my homeowners association discovered my departure, and their greed set into motion a calamitous chain of events. Now let me tell you about the infamous homeowners association that governed my neighborhood. They were notorious for their overbearing regulations, from the length of grass to the precise placement of mailboxes. To avoid unnecessary conflict, I obediently followed their rules, striving to keep the peace. In my absence, the person I had hired to maintain my lawn decided that since I couldn't physically inspect the property, his services were no longer necessary on a regular basis. This devious scheme involved neglecting the lawn for several months, only to tend to it shortly before my return, in an attempt to secure payment for an entire year's worth of work. This landscaper's cunning manipulation could be the subject of a separate tale. With my lawn left unattended, the homeowners association went berserk and bombarded me with a barrage of fines, hoping to exploit my absence. Their motive remained a mystery, and their attempts to contact me through futile means grew increasingly bizarre. When I finally arrived home, I was met with chaos, realizing I had to collect my mail from the local post office. The situation had spiraled out of control. Imagine my shock as I stepped out of the cab, eager to unlock my front door, only to discover that my keys no longer worked. To make matters worse, a for sale sign adorned my once beloved lawn. The midnight hour offered no solace, leaving me stranded and at a loss for what to do. Fortunately, a friend of mine, who happened to be awake, provided me refuge on his couch until I could gather my wits and devise a plan. At that moment, I suspected the bank might be responsible, and thus my first destination was set. To my surprise, the bank claimed no knowledge of my house being listed for sale. With desperation mounting, I began asking around, searching for anyone with information about this bewildering turn of events. It was during this quest that I confronted the head of the homeowners association, who nonchalantly recounted the entire sordid tale of fines and the subsequent placing of a lien on my property. She audaciously declared that if I wasn't present to care for my home, the homeowners association legally owned it and could do as they pleased. Utterly dumbfounded, I resolved to find a lawyer immediately. Engaging a competent attorney confirmed what I already suspected. The property was undeniably mine, and the homeowners association had no rightful claim to it. Their only recourse would have been taking me to court for the fines, which of course was an impossibility given my prolonged absence. I decided to fight back, determined to pursue every last cent I could from those who had brazenly attempted to steal my home. Though I possessed limited legal knowledge, I understood that seizing an entire house was a grave offense. Throughout this tumultuous period, my steadfast friend provided unwavering support, offering me a place to stay and easing my burdens with his unwavering friendship. From that point forward, every taco he ever ate would be my treat, a small token of gratitude for his kindness during my darkest hours. Finally, the day arrived when we presented our case before a judge, armed with extensive documentation that proved my consistent mortgage payments and my complete obliviousness to the unfolding disaster until I returned home to discover my sanctuary up for sale. Judging by the judge's facial expressions, I sensed a shared outrage, albeit veiled behind a professional demeanor. The homeowners association's attorney attempted to justify their actions by claiming they acted in the neighborhood's best interests, asserting that an unattended property could be assumed abandoned and sold. However, no one bought their far-fetched story. In the end, justice prevailed. The homeowners association was ordered to repay every cent of my mortgage payments, compensating me for the pain and suffering I endured, as well as covering my moving expenses. Furthermore, every fine they had unjustly imposed was dismissed. The homeowners association faced a staggering loss of $475,000, and although they still existed in name, their influence dwindled as the funds evaporated. Once personal profit ceased to be an incentive, the so-called very concerned citizens suddenly lost interest. The next one is a pro-revenge story. This is a story about being a good neighbor, an homeowners association that actually isn't evil, and a towing company that is. This literally just concluded moments ago. I live in a little gated community with townhomes and stuff and an homeowners association. Nothing super fancy by any means, just a quiet little neighborhood. The way it works with parking and the crux of this story is that every resident has 2 spots assigned to their unit, and they're yours to do with as you see fit. Use them, leave them empty, let your neighbor use them, let guests use them, park straddling both spots, who cares? They're yours. It's been this way for many years with nary an issue. We have a towing company contracted to the homeowners association. Now our tow company is only here to be called at a residence or homeowners association. Direct request to remove an unauthorized vehicle from their spot. The parking is numbered, but just to identify the spots saved for residents. Everyone gets 2, as we don't have any numbered, assigned window stickers or anything that serious. The towing contract is rarely used, and really even then just as a last resort. We usually just talk to each other like good neighbors do if we have a parking or other issue. So I get home this evening and right behind me comes a tow truck, the kind they use for stealth pulls where they lift up one axle and roll you down the road about 20 seconds after arrival. As I get out of my car, I see them pulling a neighbor's car who always parks diagonally in their 2 spots, due to a tight configuration and a corner spot, making it difficult to navigate even small cars in and out while parking within the lines. Now again, it's their spots, so who cares? Literally nobody, that's who. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. You see, the couple that owns the car is a sweet little couple in their 60s, semi-retired, and generally just nice, quiet people. It didn't seem likely to me that their car was being repossessed, and something about the tow truck driver and his either spotter or manager, some random dude in an F-150 following him around on a radio, just made me feel odd. Usually I'm a pretty non-confrontational person, but something about the whole situation made me act in an uncharacteristically assertive manner, and so I flagged down the driver as he was beginning to leave with the resident's car. I'll be G, he'll be TT for tow truck. G. Hey, are you pulling a repo or a resident out of their own spot? TT. I'm pulling a resident for parking in 2 spots. G. That's bullcrap. I've lived here a decade, and that's never been a thing. TT. Yeah, well, it's in the contract. You should try reading it. G. No, I've literally talked to the homeowners association about exactly this, and they have confirmed what you're towing them for is explicitly not a towable thing unless the resident themselves called it in, and I doubt they asked you to tow their own car. TT. Well, you should talk to them then, because I'm leaving with it. G. Cool, see you in an hour. So, in comes the malicious compliance revenge. In a stroke of righteous karma, the homeowners association rep who is responsible for the tow company contract of our complex got home less than 5 minutes after the tow truck left, and I was out walking my dogs. I walked up to him, exchanged the usual pleasantries, and relayed the situation as well as the fact that they had tagged at least 3 other vehicles in the immediate vicinity for future tows. He simply let out an exasperated, "Ugh, crap," and said he would get on it. I then knocked on the neighbor's door whose car got towed and informed them of the situation as it stood, suggesting they also contact the homeowners association rep up the hill. They did so accordingly, and he confirmed that he was already in the process of handling it. We stood out front and chatted for a bit, and he went inside. I retreated to my front porch and waited for what I knew was coming. 20 minutes later, as I leaned against the wall out front, I heard the jingle-jangle of victory coming back into the complex. The tow truck drops the car diagonally in both spots just as he found it, with a scowl on his face. As he leaves, we make eye contact. I grin. He gives me the finger as he leaves. I smile because he knows I won. The neighbor whose car was again parked came outside shortly thereafter, and we chatted again briefly. The homeowners association rep, whose swift action ensured their car was back in the spot exactly 1 hour from the time it was towed, came down to where we were chatting and apologized for the issue, saying that the towing company has given them other problems recently, and that with this he would be moving at next month's board meeting to contract with a new company as of January 1st, one that actually abides by what we pay them to do, which definitely isn't towing ourselves. In closing, be the good neighbor Mr. Rogers taught you to be. The next one is a petty revenge story. I had an investment account at my bank that I set up in order to save for my kids' college and used it to pay tuition. About 2 years after the last one graduated, I realized that I'd been getting a monthly statement for the account, even though it only had $280 in it. So I went to the bank to close it out and have the $280 transferred to my checking account. They sent me to an investment specialist in a small office off to the side since customer service people can't do anything with investment accounts. I want to state that the person I sat down with was doing his job, and he had rules and procedures to follow. He started out nice and friendly. When he asked why I wanted to close the account, I explained to him that I was getting monthly statements. It was costing the bank money, etc. However, he told me there would be a $135 fee to close out the account. I asked if it could be waived since it was half the value of the account. It was costing the bank to send the statements, and he got irritated with me for even suggesting such a thing. Then he spent the next 15 minutes trying to sell me life insurance, asking how much I had in my other accounts, and that he could probably do better performance-wise if I transferred it all to his investment branch. Cue petty revenge. I decided not to close out the account, but to take out $279 instead, leaving $1 in it. In a now condescending tone, he lectured me that it wouldn't stop the monthly statements, the reason I wanted to close the account. I explained to him that it wasn't worth $135 to me to stop the mail. 2 years later, I'm still getting monthly statements for the account that now has $1.03 in it. The next one is a petty revenge story. I used to work in a role where I administered the security access card system for a huge office. An obnoxious colleague used to take a shortcut from the lobby through a meeting room and out the other side to his desk. However, in doing so, he would leave the meeting room's entrance door open, which would sound an alarm once he had left the area. I sat in the lobby near the door he left open, and I was the one who had to get up and close it for him. He didn't respond to polite requests to stop, so I disabled his access pass, but only on the second door, which is closest to his desk. He would walk through the meeting room, get 6 feet from his desk, and be declined by the door. This caused him to have to walk back to me to ask if something was wrong with his access. I'd ask him to close the shortcut door he'd opened, alarm now sounding, and he always did. Then, I'd act confused and say, "Why don't you try it on that other door over there?" and direct him to the proper entrance to the office area, which had a mysterious 100% success rate for letting him through. I simulated an intermittent technical error by deactivating his card, and then reactivating it for well over 12 months, and I acted dumb any time he questioned it. "I've asked ICT about it, but nobody knows, mate. Who knows how these systems work?" Sometimes he would forget his personal pass, and I'd issue him a visitor pass and disable that on his shortcut too, which added an extra layer of obfuscation. Sometimes I'd allow him to use his shortcut, and I'd happily close the door behind him, knowing that it was all part of his education. Eventually, he learned that it was always quicker to walk straight to the proper entrance, and he stopped taking the shortcut and stopped leaving the alarmed door near me open. He never found out that I trained him. The next one is an entitled parent story. A few years ago, I lived in a house that was a block away from a public park. It was a very large park, and I noticed 2 soccer games occurring when I left one Saturday to go to the grocery store. When I returned home about 45 minutes later, I noticed there was a truck parked beside my property. The occupants of that truck were on my property. There were 2 children dressed in soccer uniforms, their mom and dad, and a large Doberman. The Doberman was lying on a picnic blanket, the parents were setting up their family's picnic lunch, and the children were chasing each other, all on my front lawn. I couldn't believe my eyes. I pulled my car into my driveway and walked over to the family, asking them why they were on my property. The entitled mother then snarked at me, "What does it look like? We are eating lunch." I asked why they were not eating in the public park that is a block away, and she responded, "It's more peaceful here." In complete shock, I then said, "This is private property, and you all need to leave now." The mother's response was, "Go F yourself, you little bee." I was furious. I pay the mortgage, I do all the lawn work, and you think it's okay to trespass and tell me where to go on my own property? So this was the easiest revenge ever. I walked right beside them to the outside tap that was attached to my sprinkler system and turned it on. The family started screaming and grabbed all their stuff as they ran to their truck. The mother and father screamed obscenities the whole time and said that they were going to get me. Well, this is where revenge number 2 came in. I downloaded my security camera footage, which showed their license plate, and brought it to my next-door neighbor, who just happened to be a police officer working that day. The parents were charged with trespassing, and I had a smile on my face for the rest of the day. The next one is an entitled parent story. Backstory. For the last few years I, 29, have been developing vitiligo all over my body, which has become very noticeable on my hands. For those who do not know, vitiligo is a skin condition in which white blood cells attack the melanin pigment in your skin, causing the loss of skin color. I have natural tan skin, resulting in white patches forming all over my hands that are very noticeable. My family, mainly my brother and dad, have mocked me for this skin condition multiple times. As a result, I have become self-conscious of my white spots and started wearing tattoo concealer to cover them up. The other day I was heading out to work and forgot to put on the concealer. One of the places I go to is my local coffee shop before heading into work. While I was in line, a kid probably about 9, 10 years old came up to me and said, "Ew, what is wrong with your hands?" I ignored them at first because I found it rude. Though they were a child, my mom always raised me from a young age to never stare, point, or criticize people's conditions, especially since we never know how they may have gotten them. After ignoring them, they asked me again what was wrong with my hands. I relented and told them that I was uncomfortable talking about it and asked them not to ask me again. Then I turned back around. I know I could have used this as an educational moment, but I do not feel that it is my responsibility to educate others on how to be decent human beings or about my skin condition. The kid did not like my response, and at this point, the child's mother got involved. Dear reader, let me tell you what. I have always thought these stories of entitled parents and rude people were exaggerated and that no one could be this oblivious. However, after this interaction, my opinion of these stories has changed. She got my attention with that dreaded phrase, "Excuse me," and I knew I was in for a ride. The interaction went as follows. EM. My child asked you what was wrong with your hands. The least you could do is tell them what happened. Me. Ma'am, I'm not comfortable talking about it. I do not need to tell your child anything. EM. Well, why not? If you didn't want people to ask about your deformity, then you should wear a glove. Now I will ask again, what is wrong with your hand? Reddit. It was at this point that I saw red. However, keeping my emotions in check, I calmly said, I was in a terrible accident in which my hand was mangled. It was mangled so badly that I almost lost my hand altogether. Each white spot that you see is a scar from where bone, blood, muscle, tendons, etc. were on the outside of my hand. I lost lots of blood and almost died from the accident. I was lucky enough that my hand was saved, but it left me with scars. While this was all fabricated on the spot, I felt that being as graphic as I could might teach her and her child a lesson in leaving people alone, especially after they already told you that they did not feel comfortable talking about it in the first place. She honestly clutched her imaginary pearls as I recounted the story, and by the time I was done she was pale-faced. She then grabbed her child and quickly left the line. The next one is a choosing beggars story. So I'm not a small guy. Other than being slightly rotund, I'm fairly tall with most of my height coming from my legs. Long legs and short arms FTW. As such, whenever I fly, I always pay for an upgraded seat. Those few extra inches of legroom save my knees from abuse from the seat ahead of me. One flight a few years back, I had managed to score an emergency exit row seat. Now, this airline, in order to satisfy emergency exit row space requirements, simply moved the row I was in back an inch or two, meaning the row directly behind had less than normal space. Important detail. Also, given my rotundness, I always get an aisle seat. I would take an aisle seat that had normal legroom over a middle seat that didn't. So I board the flight and get settled for the 6-hour-long domestic flight. I occupy myself watching the absolute clusterfuck of other people boarding. Does it really take that long to stow your crap and get in your seat? When I feel a tap on my shoulder. Sitting next to me is a mid-20s Karen. Karen asks me, would you mind switching seats with my BF so we can sit together? Now, I'm not a huge a-hole, most of the time, so I ask where the BF is sitting. Turns out he has the middle seat in the row behind us. Remember, it has less space than normal. I politely explained to Karen that there is no way I can deal with being in a middle seat for 6 hours after I explicitly paid for my upgraded seat. Now, all of this doesn't make this Karen a CB, but what does is her reaction. She proceeds to spend the next 20 minutes, all before we finally take off, trying to subtly guilt me into switching. She starts huffing and whining, turns around every few minutes to her BF and cries, "This is going to be the worst flight ever, Luckily, I'm immune to guilt. I know that all of this was just an act because the moment we took off and I could focus on my tablet, and she realized I wasn't paying her a lick of attention, she was immediately fine. The next one is a choosing beggars story. I work at a locally owned Mexican restaurant. The owners are two of the most kind, compassionate, and selfless people I've ever met. The reader board outside of the restaurant reads as follows: "Hungry? No money? We will feed you." And they mean it. If you are hungry and have no money, you can eat for free. There are a couple of exceptions to this. 1. There is a limited menu available. 2. It must be to go. It's assumed if someone doesn't have money for food, they don't have money for a tip. That's not fair to the servers. Last week, a family of 4 came in saying they saw the sign and would like to order food. I gave them the limited menu to choose from. This is the conversation we had. CB: I don't see fajitas on here. I want shrimp fajitas. Me: the only free options available are what's on that menu, sir. CB: well, that's unfortunate. I don't like these options. Can you ask your boss if I can get fajitas? I had to text my boss. Surprise, surprise, he said no. Me: I'm sorry, he said he cannot do fajitas for free. He then rolled his eyes and looked at the menu again. CB: you guys need to expand the options on this menu, but I guess I'll take this, this, and this. I rang their order in and said I would bring it out to them when it's ready. CB: we want to eat here. We need a table. Me: I'm sorry, we only do to-go orders on the free items. CB: that's not going to work for us. We want to eat here. Me: I'm sorry, but our policy is if you order off the free menu, you can only take it. Then this guy has the nerve to cut me off by raising his hand up in the air. He then herds his family to the closest booth and sits down. I follow and explain the policy again. I told them if they want to dine in, that's fine. I would cancel their free order and they can pay for their food. This got them out of the booth. The guy then demanded he speak to the owner. I again tell him he's not available. I give him a business card instead. He actually says thanks for nothing after I hand him $50 worth of free food. This individual actually left us a 1-star review on Yelp. The nerve of some people astonishes me. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.